Hey everybody, Grumbles here with another Warthunder historic battle video. So, this week I was in the mood for some lower tier action again and I decided to fly the Hawker Hurricane, mostly the Mark II. Well, let's jump right in and take a look at the aircraft. The Hurricane was the most numerous RAF fighter during the Battle of Britain, and in Warthunder the Mark I version is placed on tier 2 and the Mark II on tier 3. I personally prefer the Mark II over the Mark I. While the Mark II is heavier and therefore less agile than the Mark I, it has a more powerful engine with WEP, as well as a stronger armament consisting of 12 7.7mm machine guns compared to the Mark I's 8. This armament is of course one of the main selling points of the plane. With 12 7.7mm machine guns, the Mark II Hurricane has the same armament than Typhoon on tier 7, and down here at the lower levels, this is one of the strongest, if not the strongest armament you will get on a fighter. The range of those small caliber machine guns is of course limited, they lose power fast over longer distances, but the large amount of guns also produces a fire hose-like effect that makes it pretty easy to get at least some hits, even if not perfectly aimed. And well-aimed bursts that hit close to convergence, especially in deflection shots, usually take care of business very fast. Now let's take a look at the plane's flight performance. The Hurricane has, like the Spitfire, an early version of the legendary Merlin engine, so the plane has similar horsepower than the Spitfires and Bf-109s of the time. However, unlike the Spits or 109s, or most new fighter designs of the era, the Hurricane is not a modern monocoque or semi-monocoque construction. Instead, it is a more traditional design with a steel tube frame. This made the Hurricane easy and fast to produce and repair, as well as rugged, but that also makes the Hurricane heavier, especially the Mark II. So even though the horsepower are similar, the Hurricane's power to weight ratio is a lot worse than that of a 109 or Spitfire, and therefore it won't climb or accelerate as well, and is of course slower. The Hurricane is a slow fighter even for this tier. Now let's take a look at its turn performance. The Hurricane has a very large wing area as well as a somewhat thick wing profile, leading to a pretty low wing loading, so it is a pretty good turner, though not as good as the lighter Spitfire. However, thanks to its weight, the not so great power to weight ratio and drag from the large wings, the energy retention in turns is not very good. So as always with planes like that, you want to have a bit of a altitude to regain speed in a turn fight using low yo-yos or a dive. If your speed drops too much, the plane will become very sluggish. Maximum speed in a dive is also limited. However, dive acceleration and zoom climb are pretty good for a level 3 fighter. Because the plane is a good turner, I expected to do a lot of turn fighting in it. But when flying it, things turned out a bit differently than I had expected most of the time. Since the plane is pretty slow and not the best climber, and fights on lower levels usually take place on lower altitude, I usually arrived a bit late at the scene. Often the fighting was already ongoing when I got there. That's not a bad thing. With its great armament and being a stable firing platform, I really like playing the Hurricane in a fire support role, diving into furballs and attacking multiple targets in quick succession. This first one on the alternate history Berlin map is already a good example for what I've just mentioned. I fell back a bit while slowly climbing, so my team engaged before I got there. On the way I got the jump on a MiG-3 that was passing below me, which slowed me down even more. So when I finally approached the main fight, it mostly turned into a low-level furball, a good opportunity for diving attacks on the enemy fighters below. However, there is one fighter on a similar altitude than me and coming my way, another MiG-3, so I have to take care of him first. Now, the MiG-3s are not the best planes around in my opinion, but at least they are faster than a Hurricane, so I hope he won't make a run for it. I could not catch him if he would. I continue straight and put the nose down a bit and get ready to turn when he comes in to attack me, and I hope it will look like I have not noticed him till the last moment and tempt him to turn after me. When he is turning into me, I loop straight up and roll in behind him, and I fire a burst right away without waiting for the plane to properly stabilize. I hope that will convince him to turn to evade. The last thing I want him to do is just fly straight. He does turn, and I take the opportunity for a deflection shot before he is out of effective range. At this range, the bullets spread out enough that the 12 machine guns basically hit the entire plane, and he is going down. So I can go back to setting up an attack on the fighters below. There are two enemy fighters in range, a Yak-7B and a Lag-3. At first I want to attack the Yak-7 as it is a more dangerous target. However, I can see that the Yak already has a Spitfire on his tail. The Lag-3 on the other hand is on a friendly Hurricane 6, so of course I switch targets and go for the Lag-3 instead. As I approach, the two turn around and pass below me, so I go into a split S to attack the Lag-3 from behind and above. Here you want to be careful not to get too fast so not to break wings, but they are not that far below me. And I get a good burst in and the Lag-3 loses its wings. And I just zoom away, checking my surroundings to make sure there are no other enemy fighters appearing that might be a bigger threat than the ones below me. There aren't. The only fighters left are two Yak-7s, both below me. One is already under attack by multiple fighters, but the one I saw earlier has lost the Spitfire that was chasing him and he is coming back into the fight. Apparently he wants to attack one of my teammates, so I go for him. I utilize another split S to start my attack. Now that I am fairly sure there are no other enemy fighters around, I am not concerned about keeping my altitude up and I chase straight after him, guns blazing, hoping to get him out of the fight before he can shoot down a friendly plane. I get a few good hits in before I threaten to overshoot and I go up in a yo-yo to stay behind him, but he has taken too much damage and he is going down. Well, that was one example on how I usually use the Hurricane. Now, the next fight is more of an example of what not to do in a situation like that. In this next fight, again on the alternate history Berlin, I make two major mistakes that eventually cost me my plane. There are 4 enemy fighters, 2 Lag-3, a Chaika and the I-16, attacking a friendly fighter and a bomber, and I want to help. I have a good altitude advantage and the Hurricane's zoom climb is not the worst, so I should be able to keep my advantage up long enough for a few attacks, if I do it right, but I don't. In my first attack I engage the Chaika because he is presenting me with the best opportunity at this point, and then I zoom climb straight up. I know they are too slow to follow me and I should be above all 3. I can see 2 of them and they are very low. This is where I make my first mistake. I assume the third one is as slow as them, and I can attack those 2 I can see without danger. It turns out though that the third fighter was a bit higher than those 2, not as high as I was after my zoom climb, so I could have attacked him first if I had checked where he was, but he was high enough to go after me after I do my next attack. I can see him in time on the minimap, so I don't go straight up as he could most likely intercept me in this case. Now, the Lag-3, while not being the fastest plane around, is at least faster than the Hurricane, so he will catch up to me eventually. He is of course not a better turner than the Hurricane though, so I decide to attack him before he gets close enough to fire. So I turn into him and then go after him. He is turning around and passing below me. Now here I make another mistake. I should have used this opportunity to gain some distance from the other fighters that are still in the area, but I decide to go straight after the Lag-3, hoping I can take him out while the other fighters are still busy attacking the friendly bomber. But the I-16 is coming back to help the Lag-3 and he managed to get a bit of altitude while I went after the Lag-3. Now I fire a few more long-range bursts after the Lag, hoping I might get lucky and hit something important that forces him out of the fight before I have to deal with the I-16, but no such luck. I have to react to the I-16. He is faster, so I go into a wide barrel roll to make him overshoot and come back down on his tail. This puts me into a good fire position, but meanwhile the Lag-3 of course turned around and is attacking again. Even though I managed to take out the I-16, now I am pretty slow and I don't have the altitude to regain speed. I try to evade by turning into the Lag in a high yo-yo, but I am not fast enough to do this properly, and the second Lag-3 is coming in as well. Now, that was entirely my mistake, of course, but it also shows some of the limitations of the Hurricane in this role. While it can zoom climb decently for a plane on such a low level, its dive speed as well as straight line speed is limited. If I would have made a similar mistake, not checking the position of the third leg, in a B-40 for example, a plane with a higher dive and straight line speed, it would have been a smaller or no problem, because I could have still outran the leg, while the Hurricane could not and had to turn and fight. Now, as a trade-off, of course, the Hurricane is the better turner. I could turn the tables on the leg 3 and I-16 pretty fast. In a faster plane which usually has a higher wing loading, outturning them would have been more of a challenge. However, this ability to turn is most useful in 1 versus 1 situations where your opponent also turns. In a situation with multiple opponents, it is a less useful trait to have, as every time you turn with one opponent, another one can use that opportunity to get behind you. So in a situation like in the last clip or in this one, where a larger number of opponents are engaged below, using the plane as a turn fighter would mean descending into the furball and be vulnerable to attack from multiple opponents. Not a very good option. Luckily, the Hurricane also has the ability to hold on to an altitude advantage while doing diving attacks. So if you play your cards right, you can do quite a bit of damage before your energy state gets too low. But as seen in the last clip, if you make a mistake, you often don't have the speed to get away and you might be forced into a turn fight versus multiple opponents. That is the reason why great fighters in the war usually are fast planes, and fighter design usually puts a lot more emphasis on speed than turn rate, because a fast plane can get away when things are not going well. Now, as I have said at the start, when flying the Hurricane, I have the tendency to be a bit late, because the plane is pretty slow and not a great climber. So, since I very often end up in a situation where there are a lot of enemy planes below me because of this, I want to be a bit more careful not to give up my altitude advantage too soon, as I have done in the previous clip. A big difference to the Corsair I flew last week, where I could count on my speed to get me out of trouble. So let's take a look at another fight where I planned on putting those lessons to use and hold on to my altitude advantage better, while still putting pressure on the enemy planes. This is on the Krimsk map, and as we approach the little harbor, there are a large amount of enemy planes showing up over the city. Most of them relatively low, but a few are in slightly higher altitude. The highest enemy fighter I can spot at the moment is a Leg 3, which is attacking a friendly P-36. Since he is the highest as well as attacking a friendly, he is of course the obvious first target. The P-36 dives away and the Leg follows, and so do I. It seems the Leg is focused on the Hawk and does not notice my approach. I fire and get a few good hits in, then I zoom climb straight back up to re-evaluate the situation. I assume the Leg is damaged enough that he is at least out of the fight, so for now I want to look for another more threatening target. I can't see anything that would be a threat to me at this point, no fighters on similar or higher altitude than me, but there are a few fighters in the group of enemy planes over the city. I can spot a MiG-3 and an I-16. Taking them out makes sense to have an easier time with the bombers afterwards. But as soon as I dive on the I-16, I can see that he has noticed me and he is bringing the nose up to meet me head on, which I want to avoid whenever I can, so I pull back up and simply loop around to continue my attack after he does not have the speed anymore to keep his nose pointed up. So I can take him out without having to worry about return fire. And then I go back up again to recheck the situation. The Leg 3 I attacked earlier is still flying, but he is under attack already, so I don't have to worry about him, and I can't spot the MiG-3 anymore. However, a Su-2 is climbing up to me, and since he is in the same squadron than the second Su-2 below me, they will most likely cover each other. Now, the Su-2 is a light bomber of course, but it is one of the most agile ones in the game, and it is well armed for its level, with 2 tail gunners, one on top and one in the belly. So underestimating the plane would be a mistake, especially since there are 2 of them covering each other. Again, I have to break off my first attack, because the Su-2 was coming up for a head-on. I loop around and want to go after him, but he put the nose down in time to avoid stalling and regain some speed in a dive. And on top of that he is reversing in a split S. If it would have been only him, I might be able to hit him here, but doing so would give the other Su-2 a good opportunity to fire on me, so I break off the attack again. So I loop around and move back towards the Su-2s, hoping for an opportunity to dive on one of them. I pass the first one and I plan on doing a split S on dive on the second one should he pass below me. But in the last second I notice that the Su-2 is climbing up to me, so I go vertical to avoid his fire and most of his shots miss. Now after he stalls out I go after him. This time the second Su-2 is moving in the other direction, away from the Su-2 that I am following, so I can do one attack on him without having to worry about the second Su-2. But because of the tail gunner, I want to attack him from an angle from above, and with a large speed advantage if possible. I am faster than him, but not fast enough, and I get behind him instead of a position to attack from above. If I continue to attack like this and he mans the rear gun, he could do more damage to me than I do to him, so I go vertical again as soon as I see the tailgun fire. In the chase I build up a nice amount of speed, so I can climb back up to a pretty good altitude before I reverse and go for the Su-2 that was behind me again. Now the two are more separated and the second Su-2 is not high enough to go for me when I go after this one. He is climbing up to me again, so I go up in the vertical one last time. And just when I do that and I want to come around to attack, a Spitfire comes in and fires at the Su-2, which is still recovering from trying to go after me, and the Spitfire takes this Su-2 out. So I look for the second one, which was a bit lower. It appears he is going after the Spitfire, so I go after him. Now he has to worry about the second plane while he is attacking another. He eventually overshoots the Spitfire and turns away, and I get a burst in that takes out his tail gunner, so now I can go straight after him without having to worry about the tail gun. I follow him a bit more and get some more hits, and so does the Spitfire. But eventually I break off and let the Spitfire finish him. I want to climb a bit, just in case there are more planes around. Well, not much kills in this last part of the clip, but I think it is a good example for not overcommitting and getting killed because of it, while still putting a bit of pressure on the enemy, keeping some of its planes from doing something else. I could have maybe went after one of the Su-2s more aggressively, but only at the risk of losing the plane. Well, this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.